as was done in Macon in 585, to discuss whether or not we women were Homo sapiens, whether we had a soul, whether we were an inferior breed, an afterthought of God. When this council was convened, they did vote to allow women to remain Homo sapiens, although of a lesser inferior kind. I do not ever expect that that would happen in Islam. I could not conceive that men would even begin to think on those terms. Perhaps the most significant right granted to women in Islam is equality. And this equality is spiritual, physical, economic, and intellectual. Allah has revealed in Surah Al Imran, "Never will I suffer to be lost the work of any of you, be he male or female. They are members one of another." In Surah Nisa, "If any do deeds of righteousness, be they male or female, and have faith, they will enter heaven, and not the least injustice will be done to them." In contrast to this, Christian biblical inferiority is taught from the time of creation. And I noticed that one of the panelists this morning brought up Genesis 1, that we were all created male and female in the image of God. This is Genesis 1. Genesis 2, however, tells us that woman was created after Adam had named the animals, and God decided he was alone and needed a helpmate. He was then put to sleep, and a rib was removed from him, and woman was made. Therefore, and most church fathers have interpreted, including Aquinas and Augustine, that we are a lesser. We were not created first. We were not created simultaneously. And some church fathers have followed Aristotle's original idea that woman is an imperfect form, quote, "a misbegotten male." This has not occurred in Islam. We have been created equal with equal obligations and responsibilities, the only exceptions being certain things that we are not obligated to do equally with the men, such as faithful attendance at the Jummah Friday prayers. But we are obligated to make the prayers, and we are obligated to follow all Quranic injunctions. Another right of great significance is the right to divorce, a right still argued about in many Christian denominations and still debated strongly within the Roman Catholic Church. In Surah Baqarah, in verses 228 through 232, and I don't want to take the time to read all of them, Allah has clarified the points of divorce for men and women, granting women equal rights to divorce should there be cause to do so, meaning should she fear cruelty from her partner, or they simply cannot get along, and it is better to part amicably than to live together miserably. The point that I want to emphasize here is that women do have this right, and it has been granted from the very first revelations in Islam. The right is greatly discussed in the hadith of Muslim, Bukhari, and Dawood. The concept is that divorce is hated by God, and yet is permitted because Allah is wise and knows that sometimes we humans suffer many frailties, and it is better for us to part than to be miserable. My personal experience in this area still is very, very strong in memory. My mother divorced an alcoholic, abusive husband in the year of 1953. She returned home to her father, who to his dying day considered her an adulteress and not worthy of entrance into his church because she had remarried. He quoted to her Matthew 19, verses 3 to 9, in which Jesus said that anyone who marries a divorced woman is guilty of adultery. And of course for the woman also, if she remarries. Another point of matter debated between Christian and Muslim, or between Muslim and non-Muslim in particular, is the dress code. And I realize here that I'm getting into more social issues than scriptural, but I'm sure Dr. Badawi can take care of scriptural references if we need them. The social issues I'm very familiar. Both many surahs comment upon the dress code of a Muslim female and detail many of the facts. The major concern, it seems, in the West is the wearing of the hijab, or the scarf, not the veil. I believe when I first converted, this was one of my major problems. There are commands given to us in Surah 24 to properly cover ourselves when we go abroad and when we go out. the commands are given to us in the Quran to lower our gaze and to be modest. We do not wear the hijab or the scarf as a symbol of our husband's authority over us. And I would like to make that very clear. This is not an Islamic concept. As a matter of fact, the concept of a woman covering her head as a part of a concept relating to authority of a male is taught by Paul in the first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 11. And he says, "For a man ought not to have his head veiled, since he is the image and reflection of God. But woman is the reflection of man. Indeed, man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for the sake of woman, but woman for the sake of man. For this reason, a woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head." Islam does not tell us to cover our head because we need a symbol of authority to remember anything. It is a point of modesty, and it is a point for Muslim women to recognize one another. I can assure you, when I walk in an airport, the first thing I look for is the hijab on somebody who's there, I hope, to pick me up. All right. Another thing I would like to raise that is always brought up to us is the idea of polygamy and the issues of feminism. Polygamy is not an Islamic convention that is singular only to Islam. It also has existed in Christianity, has existed in Judaism. Unless the Christians want to deny the lives of their own prophets, we have Abraham, we have many of the prophets who had more than one wife, and their children have all been recognized. Martin Luther, the great reformer himself, stated, "I confess for my part that if a man wishes to marry 2 or more wives, I cannot forbid him, nor is his conduct repugnant to the Holy Scriptures." He himself asked for permission to marry a second wife while his first wife, Margaret of Savoy, was alive. A synod of reformers, 6 of them, approved and said that the Bible does not condemn polygamy, therefore it was approved.
Sister Ayesha, we'll discuss polygamy in more details. Okay. I would kindly ask you to...
Well, I was asked to cover.
Start because you're running out of time.
On the issue of feminism and religion, I would like to say something here. I have been told by many Muslims that being a feminist is haram, it's wrong, it's a violation. I disagree.
Well, thank you very much. I think we'll stop at this point. Thank you. Would you please have the presentation? Dr. Lewis?
We're going to try to split this up 5 minutes apiece. So, and I'm going to start. First, I think I should say that, is this on?
Yeah. This is for recording. This is for the...
Okay.
Oh.
You all can hear me?
Yeah.
I think first I should say that to talk about the Christian view of women or the treatment of women or the rights of women is probably very difficult to do. There are traditions distinguished here not only between Protestant and Catholic, but within each of those traditions and many others, quite a diversity of views. Some of that has to do with a diversity of approaches to understanding Scripture among people trying to understand Scripture with respect to the issues of the treatment and rights of women. There's a considerable debate among Christian feminists about the interpretation of Scripture and what it means, and let me say at least 3 different approaches that often come together in many of us that are working, but that I would like to distinguish very briefly. One of them is represented by a number of Christian scholars. I would name Letty Russell and Rosemary Ruther among them. Look at the gospel, at what I sometimes call the big story, the sort of most important aspect of Scripture, the story of the gracious sovereignty of God shown to us, redeeming us and calling us to discipleship, and look at the other texts, particular texts about women in relation to that dominant story of God's grace